right, Justine.
Right. Waku, everybody. Rubiakindi. My name is Justine Teba. I'm from Tesuque, Santa Clara. I'm also a descendant from like 20 other tribes or something like that. But I reflected on toxic traditionalism a lot. And last time I had talked about it, the last time I talked about toxic traditionalism, I talked about it in the context of our heteropatriarchal structures that are in place within the Pueblo communities. And this time, I feel like I rather focused on toxic traditionalism from outside the communities, and also its relation to the land and revolutionary traditions. Here we go. Pueblo people have always lived in balance, harmony, and abundance prior to colonial contact. Our homelands are especially sacred. There's an undeniable power to it, but power is power, and Pueblo people have witnessed the appropriation of it from colonizing institutions. Where the decades-long efforts of resistance and revolution of 1680 happened, the same efforts that ensured the protection of knowledge, countless lives, and preservation of land also took place where the deadliest weapon to ever exist was created. There is an absolute need to restore the balance and protection of these lands, people, and non-human relatives, and what is undeniable is Pueblo people are the ones who are tasked with it. And where it is not our homelands, the indigenous people of the lands beyond are to the protectors. Our duty is clear because it is the colonial institutions that are killing our homelands and the rest of the earth far beyond our horizons. But what stands in the way is a distortion of life and order because of this colonial lens forced on our heads. When the Spanish colonizers first came to this land, they had only one intention: to obtain power from it for their high crowns through capital gain. They would gain this capital from extracting from the land and its resources and by the exploitation of labor from indigenous people, Pueblo people. Capitalism has been the colonizers' mode and institution from the very beginning. Where indigenous life thrives, colonization does not. When indigenous people stood in their way, they removed them through brutal means of colonization. When we think of what brutal colonization is, we think of the people who had a foot cut off from their bodies, the execution of our medicine people, entire villages stolen, and the destruction of our sacred sites. What is seldom described in the tactics of colonization are the more psychological and structural ones. The way that the colonizers were able to infiltrate our very traditions, religion, and politics. To divide our people was to uproot the bonds that kept us together and kept us alive since time immemorial, and replacing them with foreign structures that were only meant to tear us apart and destroy us. Our connection with the earth and human and non-human relatives was tainted when we started treating them as commodities, when our matrilineal societies were turned upside down through the installation of a cis-heteropatriarchy. When they saw us living in abundance with the land and living as relatives, they brought us capitalism and forced every person for themselves and used the land to create money. When they saw that our women and LGBTQ2 spirit relatives offered an alternative for governance and power, they picked exactly who they would deal with and installed the cis-heteropatriarchy. When they saw our religion, they replaced it with a contradictory one, hammering a wedge between the people. And when they needed more people power to colonize, they turned our own into the colonizing army. I imagine that the submission to these foreign systems was not an easy decision, and hard compromises were made because of the threat of even more violence, more suffering, and further annihilation. But what debt is accrued further annihilates us. The adoption and evolution of these foreign institutions in our culture and traditions is what we are analyzing as toxic traditionalism. The word tradition is defined in the dictionary as the transmission of customs or beliefs from generation to generation. The word traditionalism is defined as the upholding or maintenance of tradition, especially so as to resist change. These two words encompass so much of what it means to exist as a Pueblo person, especially if you grow up or live on the reservations. Our traditions are what makes us us, and it's because of tradition that we are people who still have our language, pre-colonial customs, sacred knowledge, and ceremonies. Our entire being as Pueblx individuals revolves around our traditions and our ability to keep them alive. The term toxic traditionalism specifically describes unchanging values mixed into our culture as a result of colonialism and deliberate colonial tactics used to obstruct our prior way of life in order for us to submit to colonizing governments and colonialism in general, and keeping those traditions simply because they have become traditions. Toxic traditionalism has manifested in Pueblo communities in forms of sexism, discrimination, essentialism, lateral violence, gender violence, misogyny, heteropatriarchy, capitalism, and even diabetes and obesity if you think about it. We also look at toxic traditionalism as the distortion and weaponization of tradition and how we use those tactics on ourselves. I emphasize that toxic traditionalism does not apply to all traditions or the sacred and ceremonial. Toxic traditionalism is when a non-man marries outside of their tribe and their children are denied membership, when a man can do the same and his children are safe to belong. It's when we slut shame and attack our sisters but excuse and defend our brothers at all costs, including lives. It's when we use the church as an excuse to have domain over the earth itself and invoke homophobic, transphobic, and misogynistic ideas, practices, and violence. It's when we use blood quantum as a means to describe how indigenous or how Pueblo a person is and deny our kinship. It's when we shame our relatives in the streets for not being able to conform to capitalist system that they were never meant to be a part of in the first place, and then outcasting them by denying them kinship, protection, and lifeways. It's when we adopt the settlers' colonial borders, rules, and racism, and then ignore that we ever had a relationship with our relatives in the South, and especially during their most crucial time of need. And toxic traditionalism is when we deny the vast majority of our population to hold a position of leadership by denying their power and insight and to gatekeep knowledge from them simply because they are not a cis hetero man. To heal these cycles of trauma is to resist and dissolve the things that are poisoning us. Resistance to colonial systems and governance is key to our survival and has always been for over 3 centuries. I'm concluding that under the constraints of colonialism, resistance to those structures is truly a non-toxic traditionalism because it encompasses our earth and all its beings and operates under natural orders we come to know as a result of being tied to this land entire whole-ass millennia before the colonizers ever touched this land. In other words, resistance is traditional. But when surviving under colonialism is all you ever known, and when the world is upside down, doing what is truly the right thing will always seem like the wrong thing, and this work is often dismissed. Like I said in the beginning, power is power, and there's power in the land. Indigenous people have always lived in balance under the order of the earth and received harmony. But when colonizing institutions figure out how to manifest its power and unleash chaos into the world, and we bring our people chaos by allowing settler notions of order to infiltrate natural orders we've known since time immemorial. The work of the Pueblo Feminist Caucus and the work of the Red Nation is parallel to the work of our ancestors' restoration of balance and harmony. Much like their conclusion of revolt or die, we are at the same crossroads. The world is burning around us, and it's because of those same colonial institutions our ancestors face. Resistance and revolt was not a one-time necessity 3 centuries ago. As long as our land is occupied and colonizing institutions still exist, we have an obligation to revolt against them in any and every way we can. The task has only grown since, as we will not be free until all relatives of the earth are free. Creating perfect Pueblo utopias within the borders of the largest threat against this earth to ever exist, the state of the US, will never be the answer to our freedom. We will not be free unless all relatives of the earth are free. Today, we must revolt or die and resist and live. In their system, it might be their rules, their game, but it's still our earth and our order. The knotted cords passed Pueblo to signify the days until the Pueblo revolt came into existence because the decision to revolt or die came to our ancestors. And as long as the threat of violence to our Mother Earth and all their human and non-human beings exists, so will that cord. The resistance came to our people to ensure livelihood. We are not in time. It is because of the resistance and revolt of the ones before us that we are here today. And it will be our efforts of today that will ensure the livelihoods of tomorrow, when the time of our not comes to be undone. Let us open our eyes to a vision of a new world, for we cannot continue to live in this one. Let us open our hearts to the truth, even if it hurts. Let us maintain the traditions of strength, courage, wisdom, and tactical effort of the ones before us. Solidarity forever.